I'm Mike Barthel, and this is Risk Work News. Today's guest is a chemical engineer and expert on the transmission and operations planning sides of bulk electric power systems. She started out as a construction engineer, and that led to real-time operations support with Entergy. She moved her way up from control operator to the director of transmission planning in her 8 years at Southwest Power Pool, and she served as the senior director of the South region for real-time operations at MISO. And at MISO, she was instrumental in prioritizing diversity and inclusion through the development of the Women's Resource Group. She then moved into the role of Vice President Transmission at Southern Company, where she had 350 engineers reporting to her. She also led strategic company-wide diversity plans within Southern Company operations. Then she became president of transmission at Eversource Energy, which is a Fortune 500 company, where she was responsible for transmission policy, compliance, capital construction for the full footprint of business in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. She is currently the president and CEO at Ascenda Excellence, a management consulting leadership and development company that coaches and mentors C-level executives and helps them shape their cultures. She has been an active participant in many organizations over the years, serving on several advisory boards, including Arkansas STEM Coalition, member rep committee at NERC Corporation, the Women's Foundation of Arkansas, and CERC Reliability Corporation, to name a few. She was also a panelist at Diversity Inc. 2018 Women of Color and Their Allies event, where she shared her journey to understanding and supporting women of color. I have personally had the privilege of working with her on and off for the past 10 years. She's one of my favorite people. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and give a warm Risk Work News welcome to Katherine Prewitt. Yeah. Hey, Katherine, how are you?
Oh, great. Thanks, Mike. It's a great introduction.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. You've got a very interesting story, and, you've come up the ranks to become a president of a Fortune 500 company. Can you just tell us a little bit about your journey and, where you started and how you got to where you are?
Sure. So the key to my success is not being smart enough to know I have limitations. That's kind of the foundation. That's not quite right, but I do know my limitations.
No, that's
But
awesome.
I have approached my career from that perspective. Just having a chemical engineering degree in power utility doesn't make an awful lot of sense, especially when you've done your entire career on the transmission side. It kind of doesn't fit. But having an open mind and being curious and focusing on and learning about a lot of different things, it's been really good. The industry has been great to me in so many ways by taking me on it with the wrong degree as a chemical engineer and teaching me what I needed to know and allowing me to grow and flourish and having me be in roles that exploited my natural abilities. It's been great. So I think it's been good. People don't understand just how fun the utility space can be. It's been awesome.
No, that's awesome. So you started out as a construction engineer, and then that led to some real-time operations support with Entergy. Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I started out in the field, which is where I like to be. How can you not enjoy building things? That's what engineers love, among other things, right? So started out building things and worked my way over to operational planning, where I also did real-time support for the Entergy footprint. And that really helped me learn and understand how power works. I used to think light on, light off. That's all I knew about power. Flip the switch up and it comes on, flip the switch down and it goes off. A lot of things were happening in the industry back in the early 2000s, and Entergy encouraged a lot of us to make our way over to one of the RTOs. And so I found myself at Southwest Power Pool, as the control room operator doing real-time analysis, which again is fascinating. To try to keep everybody's lights on all the time is, it's a noble thing. Got tapped on the shoulder by one of my leaders at Southwest Power Pool and told me that I needed to go into management. I did that and made my way over into the planning organization. SPP was really smart about cross-training people. And so that having that operational experience, that real-time experience, and then making my way over into long-term transmission planning, it's fascinating because the two don't intersect well typically in the industry, and they don't intersect well because people don't move from one to the other. And so when you have both of those experiences, you can bridge that gap and you can really appreciate better the differences in the two functions and create some value that you could otherwise not create, but for having experience on both sides. I moved from there to another RTO ISO at MISO, and I started focusing on real-time support as a mid-level leader. And from there moved over to Southern Company, which is a huge, as everyone knows, a huge utility, IOU in the Southeast, working on engineering design and again, long-term planning, and then keeping my toes in the policy world and compliance arena. And then finally, making my way out of the South up to New England, which was a new experience, a brand new culture, probably one of the biggest physical moves that I made in my career because the culture is completely different and just beautiful, different climate and all of those things. And had the great opportunity to work as to continue working in the policy arena, to really be responsible for compliance in a big way for a Fortune 500 company, and then also be responsible for the implementation of a big capital project plan, which is great. And so late last year, I decided it was time to take all these leadership skills and all this culture that I've done, and I didn't even talk about all the diversity and inclusion work that I started doing a little bit at SPP. I started really on my journey there, and then at MISO and Southern in particular, focused on diversity and inclusion in a much bigger way. So I'm at Ascend to Excellence, and I'm going to focus on trying to do more of that type of thing, where that leadership, I can really exploit what I've learned and try to help companies and CEOs get the most out of their people by understanding how important inclusion is for everyone, not just inclusion for the minority and women, but inclusion of everybody. So I say inclusion without exclusion. That's really what we need.
Let's talk a little about the women's resource group that you helped form there at MISO, for example. Talk about that a little bit. And I think that's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, so, I was at the beginning of my journey in the D&I space when I went over to MISO, and I was still pretty nervous about it. My attitude up until a few years before that was, when in Rome, do as the Romans. This is a boys' club, so I'm going to be one of the boys. And I didn't want that icky title of feminist attached to me, and I still don't want it. I am not a feminist. I know a lot of things, but I'm not a feminist.
Okay.
And so I went over to MISO, and of course, some of the ladies over there had heard about what I was doing. I'd started a little bit of work at SPP, and they heard about that, and they had invited me to this group, and they're like, but don't say anything about it. And I was like, what? I don't know if I want to be a part of this. Well, I'm not sure it was really as secret as it may have been initially portrayed to me, but there were a group of ladies there at MISO that had started talking about, what could be done for women. And they developed a plan that they presented to the senior leadership for essentially a women's resource group and to the credit of the leadership at MISO, and I give them a lot of the men a lot of credit for this. They said, you know what, this is great. We love the idea of a women's resource group, but we're not going to just focus on women. We're really going to focus on everyone. We need to do this for everyone. And that really helped me understand, quite frankly, that inclusion's not about excluding other entities. And so, that's where it all got started for me. And I was on their first board. I was the chair of the board for the women's resource group there, and I just kept growing and learning and reaching out and just getting better at it. Still got a long way to go, but I'm working at it, which I think we all need to do.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And Katherine, when we talk about MISO and SPP, let's back up a little bit and maybe help the audience understand what an RTO really does, and the different. And I know MISO and SPP are similar in nature, but they have some differences as well. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So ISO, RTO, I really use those acronyms interchangeably. Legally, they're just different ways of structuring the same type of organization. But back in the late 90s, there was a big deregulation that happened in the energy space with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And these independent entities were formed as a result of deregulation. And so entities like SPP and MISO, which are RTOs/ISO. So RTO stands for Regional Transmission Organization. Let me see if I can remember what ISO stands for, Independent System Operator. But what they do is they're performing the independent functions for areas of the country so that open access, which again happened in the late 90s, so that everyone can get equal access to the transmission grid in all of these across the country. They have the responsibility for real-time operations. They have the responsibility for long-term planning, and they have responsibility for compliance, and they have responsibility for, overall policy. So generally, they're all doing those main functions, and the way they go about them is similar. They have stakeholders in each organization, but just like any company, even though they're not for profit, they're not profit organizations, they all function differently. They each have their own cultures, they each have their own identities, and they each have their own ideologies. And so the real difference between SPP and MISO gets to those core attributes, which are how they conduct their work and what their members think and want, that may or may not be the same as other ISO RTO entities. But they're doing the same functions effectively, and they have to follow the same compliance standards and guidelines and the same FERC regulations that everyone else has to follow.
See, that's interesting to me that they actually get audited by NERC too as well, like MISO does. Yeah, interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody gets audited. There's no shortage of audits going around, that's for sure.
Now I know. Well, thanks for explaining that. We started this program, and I think we've talked about this a little bit, but we've started this program as a cybersecurity awareness, kind of a helper. We want to help people because we know that after working in 10 years of recruiting in NERC compliance and NERC CIP and security within bulk electric, we realized there were some pretty serious informational gaps when it comes to security. And the four groups of people we tend to deal with are the regulators, the operators, professionals, and of course the public. And so what we're trying to do with this whole series of webinars is try to get some insight to how, from an operations perspective, how we can better understand how to leverage security and operations. And, wow, with your background, I mean, you've got the greatest background to talk to anybody about this. So we've been taking that security slant approach. Now we want to get your side of things. How do you feel about, the security and how we can, be more effective, and how NERC CIP can really help and things like that? I mean, from your background.
So, Mike, it's a great question. I'll tell you one of the challenges, one of the big challenges that I see with all the security is we get too polarized. It's probably a little too strong of a word, but we have the experience that we each have. And I guess I learned it in a big way when I moved from the operations world to the planning world. When I was in operations, all I used to say was, well, why in the heck can't these planners get the grid planned correctly? What's wrong with them? It's not hard. All we need is this. And then when I moved over to the planning world, I went, oh my God, now I understand. And so I became a lot more effective at being able to bridge that gap. I talked about that earlier on. And I don't think that that is particularly different in the cybersecurity space. It's a new field, which creates challenges of its own. We got to figure out what we don't know. We got to figure out how to protect ourselves. But in doing that, we end up specializing, I think, too much. And we have a tendency to specialize anyway, and that's okay. It's good to have specialists, but sometimes you need generalists. So you can't have too many specialists, you can't have too many generalists, or you can't get the right place. And so what I wonder about in what we're doing today is, do we have too many specialists without those generalists to help us bridge the gap? I know we have some people that have security experience and operations experience, but I think that the balance isn't maybe there to help bridge that gap so much. I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm not a cyber expert, not by a long shot. I have, when I see all of the rules and regulations that are coming out of some of our developers of standards, I'm like, why are we doing this? What are we actually protecting ourselves from? And I can't help but wonder, are we really having enough conversations with the right people? Now, I know the industry is recognizing this as a problem because they're working to bring the experts on the cyber side and experts on the operations side together to have a melding of the minds, if you will, to help get to a really nice and arguably a better solution. There's no doubt in my mind at all that the more we get on the same page, the more we become part of the solution instead of being part of the problem. Humans need to understand why they're doing something in order to be good at doing it. So you can go tell an operator all day long, here, I need you to do this. But if you don't help them understand the real reason why and the real value, then they're going to have a hard time doing it.
Right.
But it's not just about helping them understand the real reason and the value why, but it's also the folks on the cyber side understanding, well, what's the cost to this? Okay, yeah, so you just need the security done. Well, what's it costing? Because there's a cost.
Right.
It may be a monetary cost, it may be a behavioral cost, it may be, it could be any number of things. We have to understand that too, on both sides, because there's a risk reward on both sides. And we've got to be able to bridge that gap, I think, to really get to the right solution.
Well, you didn't actually say the words change management, but I'm kind of hearing that. So far, the guests we've had on this show have really indicated that change management's a major challenge when it comes to implementing security. I mean, how would you respond to that?
So here's how I'd respond to that. The way I would respond to that is, change is an inevitability of life. When I was much younger, I thought that I would eventually get to be an expert and I would stop learning and everything would be status quo and I'd be that expert and it'd be great. And maybe a long time ago that was practical. I don't know if it was or not, or if I was just young and naive. But what I absolutely know today is change is inevitable. We continue to evolve as societies, and I happen to think it's a great thing. Yeah, we keep making some of the same mistakes, but overall we're evolving. And so because we're doing that, we're gonna have to change. And change can be scary for humans. It can be risky. It's very challenging. And so I think all of us have to figure out not just how to do change, because change can be hard for us, but to figure out how to embrace it. I know that that's part of the reason that I've had as much success as I've had is because a long time ago I really embraced change. I'm a continuous learner, and I think, and as it relates to society, we have to do that. We have to figure that out. I think that a lot of the problems that we have in society and diversity and inclusion and a lot of things is the fact that we just want what we want and we want it to not ever change, and that's just not practical.